It's likely stress, Lena. Maybe anxiety. The doctor didn't even look up from his clipboard as he said it, his voice a dismissive monotone that carved a deep wound of humiliation straight through her. Her very real, searing pain was being reduced to a footnote in her chart, a psychological hiccup instead of a physical crisis. Just 3 months ago, Lena would have laughed at the idea of anxiety. She was a graphic designer who worked from her sunlit apartment, a woman who powered through deadlines with a steady hand and a sharp mind. Her life was a rhythm of creating art, hiking on weekends, and meeting friends for laughter-filled dinners. She was the picture of health, the last person to become a frequent flyer in a doctor's office. It started subtly. A deep, nagging fatigue that a full night's sleep couldn't touch. Then came the joint pain, a hot, throbbing ache in her wrists and knees that made holding a stylus or climbing her apartment stairs a Herculean effort. The final straw was the butterfly-shaped rash that bloomed across her nose and cheeks after a day in the sun, a glaring red flag on her skin that even she couldn't ignore. She had done her research. She'd meticulously tracked her symptoms, her fever spikes, the days her fingers turned white in the cold. She walked into Dr. Evans's office today with a folder of notes and a heart full of terrified hope, ready to finally get answers. Now, sitting on the crinkly white paper of the examination table in a flimsy gown, that hope was curdling into despair. Dr. Evans, with his salt and pepper hair and impeccably clean lab coat, finally looked up. His smile was thin, practiced. "Your vitals are fine. Blood pressure is excellent," he said, as if that settled it. "Sometimes our bodies manifest emotional distress in physical ways, especially for women. I'm going to recommend you talk to someone. Maybe try some mindfulness." Lena's mouth went dry. "Doctor, with respect, the rash, the pain, it's debilitating. I can't work. I looked it up and these symptoms, they align with an autoimmune disease. Could we please just run some tests? The ANA test?" Dr. Evans's smile tightened. He placed the clipboard down with a definitive click. "Lena, looking things up online is a surefire way to scare yourself. You're a young, healthy black woman. The odds of a rare autoimmune condition are incredibly low. Trust me. I see this all the time." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "You're a young, healthy black woman." It wasn't a compliment. It was a diagnosis in itself. It was a box he was putting her in, a reason not to look deeper. Her lived experience was being invalidated by his statistical assumption. He stood up, signaling the end of the appointment. "Get some rest. Cut back on caffeine. I'm confident you'll be feeling better in no time." He was confident. She was terrified. And the pain, ignored and unnamed, continued to burn beneath her skin. He was sending her home with a prescription for meditation while her body was screaming for help. What would you do if the one person supposed to help you refused to listen? The dismissal was a poison pill. Lena left Dr. Evans's office feeling smaller than she had when she entered, the man's condescending words echoing in her mind. Anxiety, mindfulness. You'll be feeling better in no time. But her body didn't get the memo. The fatigue deepened into a bone-crushing weight that made lifting her arms to wash her hair a monumental task. The joint pain escalated from a throb to a sharp electric fire that shot through her knees and elbows with every movement. The butterfly rash on her face became a permanent, burning mask. She returned to her apartment, a place that once felt like a sanctuary and now felt like a gilded cage. The sunlight that once fueled her creativity now felt aggressive, painful on her skin. She drew the blackout curtains, plunging the room into a perpetual twilight that matched her mood. Her work suffered. Deadlines she would have once met with ease slipped past her. A client emailed, "Is everything all right?" The last mock-up seemed unfocused. She couldn't tell them her hands were too swollen and painful to hold a mouse steady. Desperation forced her back into the medical system. She saw another doctor, a woman this time, hoping for a different outcome. She laid out her folder of symptoms, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. This doctor listened more attentively, nodding, but the conclusion was a variation on the same theme. "Stress can do incredible things to the body," the new doctor said. Her tone kinder, but her dismissal just as absolute. "Your blood work from Dr. Evans came back normal. Sometimes we just have to listen to what our bodies are trying to tell us emotionally." The phrase normal blood work became a weapon used against her. It was the only thing they ever looked at, the gatekeeper to any further investigation. They saw a black woman in her 30s with normal basic vitals and made a swift, devastating judgment. Nothing is wrong with you. It was a gaslighting of epic proportions. The evidence was written in pain across her entire body. But because it didn't show up on their limited tests, it didn't exist. Alone and terrified, Lena did the only thing she felt she could do. She fell deeper down the rabbit hole of online research. But this time it wasn't frantic Googling. It was targeted. She found online forums and support groups with names like Lupus Warriors and Invisible Illness Fighters. She spent hours reading stories that mirrored her own with an uncanny, chilling precision. Women, especially women of color, told identical stories of being dismissed, called anxious, told they were dramatic, for years before finally getting a diagnosis. They talked about the ANA test, anti-dsDNA, anti-Smith antibodies, terms her doctors had brushed aside. They listed symptoms she hadn't even connected: sun sensitivity, hair loss, Raynaud's phenomenon, the white fingers she'd noted. She wasn't a hypochondriac. She was a textbook case. She was looking at a community of thousands of people living her exact nightmare. And they all had one thing in common. They had to become experts on their own bodies to force the medical system to listen. The cost became more than physical. It was financial. She had to turn down projects. Her savings began to dwindle. It was social. She canceled on friends so many times they eventually stopped inviting her. "Lena's flaking again," she imagined them saying. The vibrant, independent woman she had been was fading away, replaced by a frail, isolated stranger who lived in the dark and measured her days in pain levels. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. She needed milk. The corner store was only 2 blocks away. She pushed herself out of bed, every joint screaming in protest. The sunlight hit her skin like a swarm of stinging bees. She made it halfway down the first block when a wave of dizziness so profound hit her that the world tilted on its axis. Her knees, weak and inflamed, buckled. She didn't collapse completely, but she stumbled hard, grabbing onto a parked car to keep from falling. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she stood there, clinging to the hot metal, humiliated and terrified, as people walked past her on the sidewalk, averting their eyes. In that moment, the truth was crystal clear. She was dying. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but her body was attacking itself, and the very people who were supposed to help were sending her away with platitudes. She couldn't live like this anymore. Pushing off from the car, she turned around and limped home, a new fierce resolve hardening through the pain. If they wouldn't listen to her words, she would force them to listen to evidence. She would order the tests herself. The resolve that filled her after her stumble on the street was a different kind of pain, a clean, sharp one that cut through the fog of her illness. She was done asking for permission to be sick. A few hours of determined research led her to a direct-to-consumer lab service. For a few $100s, money she could scarcely afford but couldn't afford not to spend, she could order her own blood tests. She selected them from a drop-down menu like she was shopping for groceries. Anascreen, IFA, anti-dsDNA antibodies, anti-Smith antibodies, complement levels. Each click was a quiet act of rebellion. She wasn't a doctor, but she was an expert on the landscape of her own suffering. The phlebotomist at the lab was kind and efficient. "Tough day?" she asked sympathetically as she tied the tourniquet around Lena's arm. Lena just gave a weak smile. If only she knew. The vial filled with dark red blood, and with it, Lena felt like she was handing over her fate. This vial contained the truth. It was the only witness that couldn't be dismissed. The next 48 hours were an agony of waiting. Every notification on her phone made her jump. She was paralyzed by a terrifying hope. What if she was wrong? What if the test came back normal? It would mean she truly was losing her mind, that the pain was all in her head. The doubt was her doctor's final, lingering gift. When the email finally arrived, her hands shook so violently she could barely click on the secure link. The document loaded slowly. She skimmed past the personal information, her eyes racing over the columns of medical jargon she had taught herself to understand. And then she saw it. Anascreen, IFA, positive titer, 1-1280 pattern. Speckled, a little further down, anti-dsDNA, antibodies, positive, anti-Smith, antibodies, positive. Positive, positive, positive. She read the words over and over, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't a stressed-out woman manifesting emotional distress. She was sick. She had proof. The emotions that flooded her were so contradictory they left her dizzy, a soaring, vindicating triumph immediately followed by a crushing wave of grief. She had been right, but she had a devastating, lifelong autoimmune disease. She sat on her floor in the dark and cried, for the life she was losing and for the victory of finally being seen. The next day, she didn't call. She walked into Dr. Evans' office, the printed lab results clutched in her hand. The receptionist looked surprised to see her without an appointment. "I just need a moment of the doctor's time," Lena said, her voice calm, but leaving no room for argument. Dr. Evans looked up from his desk when she entered his office, his expression one of polite confusion. "Lena, is everything all right? We don't have an appointment today." "No," she said, her voice steady. "We don't." She walked forward and placed the single sheet of paper on his desk, right on top of the patient file he was reviewing. She pointed to the lines she had committed to memory. "I took your advice, doctor," she said, the words measured and clear. "I decided to be proactive about my health." Dr. Evans's eyes scanned the page. She watched his face change. The polite confusion first shifted to focused attention, then to dawning comprehension, and finally to a pale, stunned shock. His professional mask slipped completely. He saw the positive results, the sky-high titers. He saw the undeniable diagnostic criteria for systemic lupus erythematosus, written in the cold, objective language of science. He stammered, looking from the paper to her face. "Lena, where did you get this done?" "It doesn't matter where," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "What matters is that it was done. You told me the odds were low. You told me I was anxious. You told me to practice mindfulness." She paused, letting the weight of his failure hang in the air between them. "My body was screaming the truth, and you refused to listen." "Why did it take this?" She tapped the paper. "For you to hear me?" Dr. Evans had no answer. He just stared at the results, his mouth slightly agape. The infallible authority he had worn like his white coat was gone. He had been proven categorically, undeniably wrong by the very patient he had dismissed. The turning point wasn't celebratory. It was a solemn, powerful, and deeply uncomfortable silence. The evidence was now on the table. The silence in Dr. Evans's office was thick and heavy. He stared at the lab results, the paper seeming to hum with the intensity of his miscalculation. The color had not fully returned to his face. Lena watched him, waiting for an apology that she knew in her heart would not come. An apology would require him to fully dismantle his own ego, and that was a bridge too far. Instead, he cleared his throat, a hollow, awkward sound. He finally looked up, his eyes unable to meet hers for more than a second. "I will refer you to a rheumatologist, Dr. Pierce. She's excellent." He began scribbling on a notepad, the scratch of the pen loud in the quiet room. It wasn't an, "I'm sorry." It was an, "I was wrong," and it was the best she was going to get. Lena took the slip of paper. It felt like a permission slip to her own life. "Thank you," she said, her voice flat. She didn't thank him for his belated help. She thanked him for ending the conversation. She turned and walked out of his office, out of the clinic, and into the sunlight. It still hurt her skin, but for the first time in months, it also felt warm. The appointment with Dr. Pierce was a different world. The specialist's office was calm, the chairs in the waiting room designed for people with joint pain. Dr. Pierce herself was a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. She didn't just look at Lena's chart. She looked at Lena. "Tell me what's been happening," Dr. Pierce said, and she truly listened. She nodded as Lena spoke, asking clarifying questions, never once interrupting or dismissing. She examined the rash. She gently felt Lena's swollen joints, and she reviewed the damning lab results with a clinical, knowledgeable eye. "Lena," she said, her tone both gentle and direct. "Based on your symptoms and these results, you meet the diagnostic criteria for systemic lupus erythematosus." "I know that's a lot to hear." Hearing the words from a compassionate, believing expert was profoundly different from reading them on a page. It was a validation so complete it was almost dizzying. It was also a life sentence. There was no cure. This was her new reality. "It's a lot," Lena admitted, her voice shaky. "But mostly I'm just relieved to finally know," Dr. Pierce smiled warmly. "That is the most common reaction I get. The not knowing, the fighting to be heard, is often worse than the diagnosis itself. Now, we can finally start helping you." They talked about treatment plans, medications to suppress the overactive immune system, lifestyle changes, sun protection. For the first time, Lena felt like she was on a team, with a coach who was actually on her side. She called her older sister Keisha from the parking lot. The moment she heard Keisha's voice, the dam broke. The tears she had held back through the confrontation, through the new appointment, finally came. Great. Heaving sobs of release. "He didn't believe me." "Keisha!" she cried into the phone, the words tumbling out. "He thought I was crazy. I had to diagnose myself." "I know, sweetie. I know," Keisha said, her own voice thick with emotion. "But you did it. You fought for yourself. I am so proud of you." That was the permission Lena needed to finally grieve, for the healthy body she lost, for the months of pain and isolation, for the trust that was broken. But she was grieving on a path forward, not in a dark room with no exit. In the weeks that followed, as her medication began to slowly take the edge off the pain, Lena found a new purpose. She returned to the online forums, but now not as a lurker seeking answers. She became a contributor. She shared her story in posts titled, "How I Forced My Doctor to Listen," and "You Are Not Crazy." She offered support to other women, especially young Black women who posted their own stories of dismissal. She became an expert navigator of a system that had failed her, guiding others on how to order their own tests, what to say to dismissive doctors, how to keep a symptom journal. Her graphic design skills found a new purpose. She created clear, easy-to-understand infographics about lupus symptoms that were shared thousands of times. Her pain became her purpose. Her struggle became her strength. The lesson wasn't about vengeance against Dr. Evans. It was about the profound power of listening. It was about the chasm that exists between a doctor's textbook and a patient's lived experience, and how that chasm becomes a canyon when tinted with bias. Lena's story was a testament to the terrifying courage it requires to advocate for yourself when your body is failing you and your voice is being silenced. She had learned that sometimes the most important diagnosis isn't found in a medical chart. It's found in the willingness to believe someone when they tell you they are hurting. And the most powerful treatment isn't just medication. It's the healing balm of finally being heard. Her journey had begun in dismissal and despair, but it ended with a voice, her own, stronger and more powerful than ever before, ready to echo for others lost in the silence.